In a rare intervention into politics, the Lady Chief Justice has slammed Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer over their criticism of a court decision that allowed a family of Gaza refugees to come to Britain. This is the exchange she says concerned her.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision.
Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes.
The Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, was condemned herself for wading into politics, as Stephen Barrett said Parliament can criticise anyone it wants. He said this was typical of Versailles thinking among judges.
It's a constitutional mistake. I'd like to thank Tom for his passionate defence of our constitution. It's quite important that people know how it is, how it's different from other constitutions and how it works, because he's right to highlight that we got ourselves into the Industrial Revolution and made ourselves very, very wealthy by being able to use Parliament. Okay, and that's why Parliament is the most important thing. It can do all sorts of extraordinary things. It could pass an act specifically overturning this case if it wanted to. It can pass an act sacking judges if it wants to. Parliament is supreme. It's really quite a mistake for the Lady Chief Justice to have done this. I call this Versailles thinking. There seems to be an air of going around that certain elite people are above or beyond criticism. Well, I'd just like to point out that is not British. That is not our system. And you can always criticise judges. Of course, we are more than welcome to do so. I mean, you mustn't threaten violence, obviously, or do anything illegal, but criticising people, even your betters, is perfectly possible in a democracy. That's what a democracy is. I think this problem has arisen because of Tony Blair's constitutional changes in 2005. Previously, we would have had a Lord Chancellor who was also a judge and a senior politician, and he or she could have listened to the concerns, if there are concerns of the judiciary, and taken action and fixed things or settled feathers and calmed everyone down. Such a person would be an experienced politician, which the Lady Chief Justice is not. And what's happening here really is the Lady Chief Justice is being sucked into the vacuum that Tony Blair has created. And now she's holding a press conference? No. I strongly suggest that we repair the Constitution and save the Lady Chief Justice from these burdens, and we all stop Versailles thinking, or we'll all end up how Versailles ended up.
Extraordinary, given that we sort of pretend that we have a separation of powers so often in this country, because we established a Supreme Court that sits separately from Parliament. Of course, the Law Lords used to sit in the House of Lords. I mean, Baroness Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, is literally a parliamentarian. She has a seat in the House of Lords. There is no separation of the legislature and the judiciary as there is in other countries. It's literally fused. And yet, it's extraordinary. Not only journalists who might be forgiven for sort of watching too much West Wing or whatever else it is, but also members of the judiciary themselves. The Lady Chief Justice. Now almost sort of trying to invent a new system where justices sit above and over our elected parliament, which has never been the case.
No, and you're quite right to point to the Civil War, because judges really represent royal power. And the whole point is that Parliament beat royal power and Parliament is in charge. That's why Parliament created the Supreme Court and moved the law lords, because it has supreme power to do things. And that cannot be forgotten. We need to remember our Constitution. We've had repeated instances of members of the elite who really have brainwashed themselves into thinking that our Constitution is what it isn't. And we really need to go back to a deep understanding of our Constitution and how things work. Otherwise, we'll never get ourselves out of any of these messes. The President of the Supreme Court had a really lovely phrase where he called it a widespread misunderstanding of the Constitution has arisen. Well, it shouldn't really have reached the Lady Chief Justice, should it? I mean, this is, this is a problem. And I'm sure many barristers watching this will be thinking, oh dear, he shouldn't be saying that. Oh gosh, no, that's terribly brave. At the end of the day, we've got to return to basic honesty and common sense. And we really need to understand our Constitution. If people don't understand it, I'm happy to teach them it.
And Robert Courts told GB News we live under the rule of law, not the rule of lawyers.
Well, that is absolutely right. I mean, I'm frankly staggered that Baroness Carr seems to have called this so badly wrong, because she seems to be confusing the fact that you can respect the independence of the judiciary while still thinking that they've got something wrong. I, as a barrister, can write an article in a legal journal if I want and say that I think a decision is wrong. You, as a journalist, can say it. A member of the public can say what they think. The leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister, and let's not forget this is a Prime Minister who is a DPP, so he gets it as much as everybody does, they are entitled to say what their constituents are thinking. The key point here is the one that you've already said, which is that Parliament makes the law, the judges simply interpret it. And if Parliament sees something in the courts that it doesn't like, its job, it's literally its elected function, is to legislate in order to put that law right. So not only is the PM and the Leader of the Opposition in Parliament being criticised for something they're perfectly within their rights to do, it is exactly what they are elected to do.
Exactly right. And it was refreshing, I felt, Robert, to see the opposition and the government united in calling something out they both felt was bad law. That's what we need more of in this country. And I was also struck, Robert, by the comment Baroness Carr made when she said it is for the government visibly to respect and protect the independence of the judiciary. Well, what about Robert Courts, where a lot of people are saying, well, is it independent? Is it politically neutral? Is there something else going on with conversation we've been having since Brexit? And certainly where we see Ukrainian schemes being appropriated, being bent to allow Palestinians into the country, we've got no idea who they are. This is the war zone. Hamas operate there. The public, journalists, the parliament have every single right to question not only this individual decision, but the entire political neutrality or independence of the system itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely bang on. And the key phrase to remember is this, which is that we live under the rule of law. We do not live under the rule of lawyers. And we're seeing increasing judicial activism. Now, if judges want to be more activist, then yes, they're independent. They can do that. But if you're going to insert yourself into political issues, and this is about as highly political as it gets, then you can't expect to be above criticism. And the LCJs here seems to be trying to establish a principle whereby judges are able to get involved in policy, but are not able to be criticised. And the only people who can overturn their decisions are other judges on an appellate basis. And that is simply constitutionally wrong. It's wrong in law. It's unacceptable in a democratic society. Parliament is elected. Parliament is sovereign. Parliament makes the law.
And you think, Robert, this will just exhume that this bad feeling that there is between the public and the judiciary, which none of us want, and this feeling that they are above criticism, it just isn't healthy.
It's an extremely unwise intervention that we've seen today from the LCJ, because she's fundamentally misunderstanding two concepts. It's important that you understand the place that each of these functions have within society. Parliament makes the law, and the courts interpret it. The courts do not make the law without Parliament having the ability to debate and to change it. This has been an extremely unwise intervention from her today, and she's fundamentally confusing some pretty basic principles.